when I was advised that I had been selected to receive this award, they didn't tell me I'd have to speak to an auditorium full of people. I have been a criminal defense lawyer for many years, but I usually only speak to 12 or 14. So this is a challenge, but I certainly want to thank the War College and the War College Foundation for this recognition and all that it does for not only the War College, but for our community and our nation. Before I went to West Point, I prayed about what God would have me do. And I felt the call to go, and I did go. And then throughout my military career, I continued to ask for God's guidance, and I hadn't planned to mention this, but since we've been mentioning other things in the discussion, when I was in Vietnam, I was an advisor, and some of you may have been in the Delta, where the night the Viet Cong would move on the canals and rivers, and we developed a means to try and combat that by having a helicopter with flares and a Vietnamese officer, an American officer, and a radio operator, and then a gunship that would follow. And we would drop flares over the canals and rivers, and often they had 50 caliber machine guns that they would shoot, but they had tracers, and so the gunships would come in and hit them. But one thing that we probably didn't think that much about, that at some point their 50 caliber machine guns might be successful. And one night they were, and they hit the tail rotor on the helicopter. And those of you who have been in the aviation part know that without the tail rotor, the helicopter goes round and round and round. And so all of a sudden we were going round and round and round. And what came to my mind at that time was Psalm 991. And in that psalm, and you might choose to go back and look at it, it concludes with the passage that he will lift you up with his angels, with the wings of angels, lest you dash your foot against a stone. The helicopter crashed in a rice paddy, nose down, and the outstanding young pilots managed to lift it up just enough so that instead of going forward or sideways, it hit and sat down. The blade crashed between the pilot and the co-pilot, hit one of the co-pilot's foot and broke his leg, but there were no other injuries. We had, as many of you would know, we had a plan for what we all exited and met at 3 o'clock. And we got away, and the radio on the helicopter didn't work. And so, but I had a Vietnamese radio operator, and so we got away, and I said, all right, call the gunship to come get us, because it was pitch black, and we were in a rice paddy, and it was about above knee deep. And he got all upset. He didn't know where his radio was. And so I went back to the helicopter, and the engine was still running. It hadn't shut down. And the radio wasn't there. But as I walked back, I stepped on something, and it was the radio, and it worked. And they were able to come and get us. I mentioned that story only to say that that was a singular incident, but throughout my career and before I went to West Point, I prayed about that decision, and I wanted to play football, and I had visited several colleges, but and at that point, Army was doing very well. They had won in 1958, been very successful with a Heisman Trophy winner. And so in any event, I decided to go, and I prayed about it. And then when I graduated, I went into the infantry, and then went to Germany and was reaching the 5-year commitment, and that's when Vietnam started. And so I went to Vietnam as an advisor, and then when I was making a decision about what to do next, I again prayed about what God would have me do, and I didn't always follow what God suggested I do. But his plan was that I get out of the active Army but continue to serve in the Army Reserve, which I did, the overall service over 30 years. And I also felt the responsibility, not just the calling, but to serve in the community. And you heard some of the things that occurred, but I want to mention just a few that I think are examples of how our strategic learning and strategic thinking that you develop in the War College is applicable to a lot of the things we do. And I want to correct one thing. I think maybe you said I was a criminal defense lawyer. There was a famous lawyer back in the 20s who used to say he wasn't a criminal defense lawyer or a criminal lawyer. He was a lawyer who practiced criminal defense rather than the adjective criminal lawyer. One of the things that when I first began practicing was the problem of what to do with indigent defendants. The Supreme Court had said they have a right to counsel, but they didn't say how you're supposed to do it. And so what most states did, and in Alabama we had appointed counsel, people volunteered to serve, but it paid almost nothing to do it. And so people were reluctant, and I knew the Chief Justice, and he asked me if I would serve on a committee to solve that problem. And I said, how am I going to solve the problem? I'm not in the legislature. And he said, well, you figure it out. And so we ended up recommending an increase, and they did increase it somewhat from $10 an hour to $20 an hour. But later on, as I progressed in my civilian career as a lawyer, I continued to have that as a concern. And as president of the Alabama State Bar, I called a session, and we had representatives from different parts of the country and judges and lawyers to see how we might help solve this problem. Now, I have to admit, I had a plan before we had the meeting. But a lot of other states had begun having statewide public defender programs where there were full-time lawyers who did nothing but public defense. And so as a result, not of what I did, but what all of these people did, we ended up establishing a statewide public defender system that has been very successful, and it's now in both the state and the federal courts, and provides far better representation than somebody just having been called to come and stand. And often it was not very effective. And my concern, too, about the role of lawyers in the community, as well as the role of Army officers in the community, is in terms of looking at problems, and I have to say I learned this at the War College, looking at it from a broader or strategic perspective. And as president of the State Bar of Alabama, we were concerned about young lawyers, and it was a time in a young lawyer's life where his primary focus often was how much money can I make at this, or how much, which is a valid concern. You've got families and college, but we wanted to try and increase the interest in service to the community. So we started a program, the Alabama State Bar Leadership Forum, and we invited outstanding lawyers and others in the community to come and speak. And one of those who we invited was General Hal Moore, who you all may remember from the movie We Were Once in Young. Well, was living in Auburn, Alabama. Some of you senior officers know that the current senator from Alabama was the Auburn coach who's been blocking promotion. So in any event, that all worked out, and the leadership forum did an excellent job in encouraging young lawyers to serve not only in the legal profession, but in their communities and churches and otherwise. And it continues today with continuing progress. I was a part of the old corresponding studies course, and my wife, Faye, put up with my getting these big boxes of books, and she put me in a bedroom upstairs, and that's where they stayed, but I didn't mind the books because I'm glad it wasn't today when you're using a computer. I'd have been in a mess. But what I worried about was the people here at the War College who were trying to read my writing. I couldn't type fast enough to keep up with the program, but somehow or another they did, and I really found the corresponding course to be fascinating and extremely important. And the concept of strategic planning, if it wasn't clear from what I was saying, is applicable in leadership in the community. And I think today in particular, we need young leaders, Army officers and members of Congress and otherwise, who think strategically about how we can best continue to lead the world, and it's a challenge. But I want to thank the War College. I want to thank particularly Colonel Collins, who has been so helpful in arranging our visit here. And again, thank you very much for this recognition, and we look forward to all of the graduates of the 24 class for outstanding service to your nation. Thank you.